have a few disclaimers just so we are all on the same page today. Firstly, I'm going to be talking to you about maintaining your historic home, but of course, most of what I'll be talking about today can also apply to any type of historic building. So if you happen to own a commercial property or some other type of investment property, these same practices may apply. I'll also be referencing some things that are specific to the state of Colorado, but I will try to note those as we go along for anyone joining us from out of state. So feel free to ask for clarification if you aren't sure about something and whether or not that happens in your state. Next, I'm sure it goes without saying, but every house is different. So to give you a realistic perspective of historic home ownership, I have endeavored to include only examples from my own house in the presentation today. So I think it's important to acknowledge a couple things up front about my house. First, that my house is not high style, it's not fancy, and it's probably not what comes to mind when most people think of a historic house, and that's okay. You know, historic preservation is about preserving all types of buildings, not just fancy ones. The other thing to note is that my house is located in a fairly harsh climate, so it's subjected to more sunlight and harsh winters than other places in Colorado. So again, things might be a little different for you and your house. So if you don't already own a historic house, why would you want to buy one? Many of you have probably heard all the horror stories associated with buying an older home, that they're money pits, that they aren't energy efficient, and that the Historical Preservation Society is never going to let you change anything about it. And we're going to be addressing most of those misconceptions today in this webinar, but I also recommend joining us again on August 19th for our webinar on preservation myths, where we're going to discuss more of those in some more detail. So believe it or not, with a bit of planning, buying a historic home can be more cost-effective than buying a newer home, especially if you're willing and able to tackle some home improvement projects yourself. If you've ever watched those house flipping shows on HGTV, then you've probably seen this in action. Historic homes are often located in more desirable neighborhoods that are more often than not walkable and have a better sense of community. There's been, multiple economic studies that have shown historic districts also have more stable property values and are thus able to withstand economic recessions better than their newer counterparts, even in lower income neighborhoods. And with a historic home, you have not only the opportunity to improve your investment through that sweat equity, but you can also take advantage of certain grants and tax credits that are only available to historic homeowners. And we'll be talking about more of those in a minute. And of course, we have to note that a lot of people buy historic homes simply because they love them and their history. And we are so grateful to everyone that has chosen to care for a historic home and thereby protected the history of our communities. So since I'm sharing personal examples today, here is a historic photo of my house. I think this photo was taken around 1940, so about 5 years after the house was built. And as you can see, I also have a historic shed, which I'll be talking a bit about today too. So when you're looking to purchase a historic home, the process is pretty much the same as buying a newer home. First, you will want to find a real estate agent that understands what you're looking for. This may be more difficult than you would imagine, depending on how many historic homes are in your area. So you may need to do most of the legwork yourself by, getting on one of those real estate websites and doing your own research. The nice thing is that some of those websites will actually let you filter by the age of the home. So I know when I look at houses online, I only look at houses that are 50 years or older because that's all I care about. But you can also contact your local Historic Preservation Commission if you have one in your community and let them know that you're interested in purchasing a historic home because they might know of potential sellers and can provide you with insight as they work with historic properties in your community all the time. This is also a good time to form a relationship with them, which could be helpful down the road, and we'll talk about a few of those instances here in a minute. And of course, you can contact owners directly if there's a particular house you are interested in. This seems to be more successful when it comes to historic homes. I'm not entirely sure why, but you can try mailing them a letter or dropping a note in their mailbox. You never know what might happen. And of course, the other important factor of buying a house is getting your financing together, perhaps the most important. So unless you are independently wealthy, you probably can't pay cash for your home, and you might need some funds to do necessary repairs as well, and you might need to, finance that as well. So you shouldn't have any trouble getting, just a normal regular loan for a house in good condition. But if you're looking at a home that needs some work, as historic homes often do due to deferred maintenance, you may need to consider a construction loan or a 203K loan through the Federal Housing Administration. You can also consider tax credits for any rehabilitation work you plan on undertaking after purchasing. So one other thing I want to note is home insurance. We've heard some horror stories in our office about insurance companies refusing to insure historic homes. That really isn't typical. You can always shop around for a new insurance company if you're running into difficulties, or feel free to contact our office for assistance. We'd be happy to help clear up any misconceptions there with your insurance company. So here's a picture of my house today. You can see it has an addition on the left side there, which was built in 1953. When my spouse and I decided to buy a home, we knew we wanted to get a fixer-upper, so we pursued a 203K loan even before we had found a house. So we were looking for a house that hadn't been gutted and still had some historic interior finishes, which if you've looked at houses these days is increasingly hard to find. So we had admired this house for a while before it went on the market. So we were quick to call as soon as it became available, which is probably the only reason we were able to get it. So it needed about $30,000 worth of work done that we couldn't do ourselves. So the 203K loan was perfect for that. But that's, a whole nother webinar that I'll try not to get into today. So when you're looking at buying a historic home, you should find out if it has any type of historical designation first. As you can see from this chart, there are 3 levels of designation here in Colorado, and each comes with its own benefits and responsibilities. On the national level, there's the National Register of Historic Places, which doesn't really place any restrictions on the property, but it does make you eligible for some financial incentives. The Colorado State Register of Historic Properties is very similar in that way. But the most important level of the designation is local, and that can be through your town, city, or county. And restrictions on what you can do with your property can only happen on the local level. And even then, it could be optional. So each community is different, and that's why you see a lot of maybes on this chart. So you'll definitely want to look into what the rules are for your own community before you purchase a designated home or you pursue designation for your home, just so you fully understand the requirements. You don't want any surprises. But your local government staff members, they'll be able to answer any questions you have about this process. And so again, I highly recommend talking to them ahead of time, just so you already have that relationship in place. So for me, my house wasn't designated when we purchased it, but we did choose to locally designate it soon after we closed. So my community has voluntary compliance with our preservation regulations, which means if I were to apply for a permit to do work on my house, the work would need to be reviewed by my local Historic Preservation Commission. But regardless of their decision, whether they approved it or not, I could do whatever I want. Some communities have mandatory compliance, and that means that your project would have to be approved by the commission before your permit can be issued. So, unless you're planning a major addition or big changes to your home, this process shouldn't affect you too much, but it's definitely something you want to be aware of. So let's say you bought the home and now you're ready to start making it the best historic home it can be. Unfortunately, a lot of historic homes suffer from deferred maintenance because people, just aren't into maintenance these days. So you might have your work cut out for you. But you may have purchased a home that's in great condition, lucky you, in which case this webinar is still for you because now is the time to start planning ahead. A little bit of maintenance each year can save you thousands of dollars in the long run and is ultimately what makes historic homes more cost effective. So let's take a look at the skills that you're going to need to maintain your home. Again, keeping in mind that things will differ depending on what type of house you have. The number one skill you will likely need is preparing surfaces for painting, whether that's through scraping, stripping, cleaning, whatever. There is just no getting away from it, especially painting. And then of course there comes the painting itself, which is also a very necessary skill. though I would argue the preparation is often more important than the painting itself. Another skill you will likely need is reglazing windows. So this involves replacing the putty that holds in the panes of glass in your window, which is obviously important. And then of course you will have to paint those windows too, so it all comes back to painting really. It's also a good idea to have some basic carpentry skills. The more advanced your skills, the more money you'll be able to save. But of course you might also need more equipment for more advanced skills, so something to keep in mind. Also repointing. I don't have any repointing skills, but depending on your house, if you have a lot of masonry on your house, you might also need to have repointing skills as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And so at this point, you're like, well, Erica, that sucks. I don't have any of these skills. Can I not take care of my historic home? To which I say, of course you can. We all have to start somewhere. If you're anything like me, you know, I'm very unhandy, but I have still managed, you know, to learn how to glaze a window, to prep surfaces for painting, things like that. So a good place to start is, of course, the internet. You know, there's videos and step-by-step instructions for pretty much anything you ever wanted to do out there on the internet. You just type it into Google and there it is. And the nice thing about preservation is that this stuff has been done for hundreds of years, so these are not secret skills. They're readily available out there, ready for you to learn. But another great way to learn is to, you know, practice on someone else's window. Break their window before you go and break your own. So see if there are any workshops being offered, you know, in your community. Maybe your preservation commission is offering one. These might be a free workshop. They might be for a fee. If you know, were willing to travel, I know there's Bob Yap out in Hannibal, Missouri, has a great school where he offers classes specifically for windows and other, you know, other parts of your house. Here in Colorado, we also have the Rocky Mountain Center for Preservation. So this is a relatively new entity. And this is part of History Colorado, and it's based in Leadville, out of the Healy House up there. And they're beginning to offer workshops around the state. Of course, you know, we're having issues with that right now, but including workshops on windows. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check out their Facebook group. And then HistoriCorps, they are also based out of Colorado, but now they're doing projects nationwide. And so they have all kinds of opportunities. They're basically a volunteer-based construction crew for historic buildings. So you can go, you know, hike to these amazing spots in the National Forest, camp, they'll feed you, and you can learn these skills. So that's a great way to spend the weekend. So tools, you know, we don't need to get too fancy here. They didn't have really fancy tools back in the day. It's good to start with the basics. Hammer, obviously, screwdriver, Phillips, and flathead, because of course, those flathead screws were more popular back in the day. The paint scraper of your choice, or, you know, if you're like me, you might have 5 or 6 different paint scrapers, depending on the application. You'll probably grow that number over time, but fortunately, they're pretty inexpensive. And then paint brushes, or, you know, whatever your paint applicator of choice is, again, it's going to depend on your house and on your project. And so, of course, you're going to need some more advanced tools as time goes along, as projects come up. I always recommend asking a friend or a neighbor to borrow their tools for your project until, you know, it's something you know you're going to need more often than not. No sense in going and buying a new tool that you're only going to use once. As far as supplies go, again, this is going to be based on project, and you want to keep in mind that a lot of these have a limited shelf life. So, you know, you don't want to go buy wood epoxy that you're not going to use for 2 years because it's not going to work. When it comes to paint stripper, you definitely want to avoid paint strippers that have methylene chloride in them. That's just for health reasons. I strongly recommend you avoid those. There's a lot of great products out there now that don't contain that. They might not work as quickly or quite as well, but your body will thank you for not including those toxic chemicals in your house. Wood consolidant and epoxy for various repairs. And you're going to learn about those probably when you attend one of those workshops or one of those trainings that I was talking about. And that's a great time to ask them what supplies they use. You know, what brands do they recommend? Take advice from them because they've been doing it for years. And so, you know, they probably have a product that they can recommend. Of course, I have included some products that I have in my own home here. Let's see, we have glazing putty, and of course the glazing points for window repairs. Those you can get at any hardware store. And then of course paint. Once again, it's going to depend on the application. There's a lot of strong opinions about what paint should be used on historic buildings, you know, whether that's latex or oil-based paint. I'm not going to tell you what's best because you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. But a good way to do that is to do a test patch, maybe of 2 different kinds if you're not sure, and leave them for a year before you commit to, you know, painting your entire house with a paint. See how it holds up for you. So, financial considerations. Obviously, a lot of this does come back to money. So private residences here in Colorado are eligible for our state preservation tax credit. So houses that are listed on the national, state, or a local register that is also a certified local government are eligible for this tax credit. So the credit is 20%, at least 20% of qualified rehabilitation expenditures. That's what a QRE is. And so that's the work, you know, that you're actually spending to rehabilitate your house and not for something like a new stove or landscaping, stuff like that. You have to spend at least $5,000 of those QREs to be eligible for the tax credit. If you're located in a rural area, which is most of Colorado, you can get an additional 15% credit, so that's 35%. And if you are not, but your county has been declared a disaster relief area in the past 5 years, you can get an extra 5%, so 25%. Unfortunately, you cannot claim both bonuses. It's one or the other, so if you're rural, obviously you want to go with that one. You can receive up to $50,000 in credits per property per person, but if you were to sell your property to someone else, it resets and they could get another $50,000. That lasts for 10 years. So if you owned your house for 10 years, then you needed to do another $50,000 worth of work, you could do that. There's no limit to the amount or number of credits available each year. We just don't have a lot of people taking advantage of these, so go for it. Please do. And you can take it up to, for up to 10 years. So if you don't have enough income liability on your income taxes, or for your state income taxes, you can keep taking the credit for up to 10 years. These credits cannot be transferred or sold. They have to stay with you as the property owner, but there is no recapture period. So again, you could get your credit and then sell the property and that would be a-okay. So you'll also want to check that if any local organizations might offer grants for preservation projects. So just send them an email, give them a call and ask. Many local governments offer those if they are preservation minded. And there might be some other local financial incentives to take a look at, like sales tax rebates. I know we have a few of those here in Colorado. And then, you know, if you have a project and you find that a contractor is going to be too expensive, maybe it's time to reconsider doing it yourself. And we will talk about that more in a minute. And then, of course, the most important thing, in my opinion, is planning ahead for repairs and planning ahead for that maintenance. You know, historic homes and modern homes all have sacrificial parts that are meant to be replaced over time. So roofs, well, most roofs, you know, asphalt shingles, things like that. Window glazing, paint, that's all meant to be replaced over time. So it shouldn't be a surprise, you know, when it comes time for your roof to be replaced. You want to plan ahead for that. Set aside that money. That's just a part of, you know, responsible home ownership. And so here I have a photo from my own house, and this is actually what it looks like right now. If you drive by, I have some plywood over the window because this is a project, we're repairing one of the sashes. That's a project I would have hired out before, and that would have cost quite a bit of money, but now it's going to cost me maybe 20 bucks or so to do it myself. So again, that is the benefit of learning these skills and learning how to tackle these things yourself. But of course, we must discuss the safety concerns. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the dangers of lead paint. If you are not, I highly recommend going online and reading the EPA's guidance on that. If you buy a historic home or you rent a historic home, you're gonna be given a pamphlet about lead paint, so you should know all about it. And you'll have to sign a disclosure form. For me, I always assume lead paint is there in a historic home. I've never actually tested for it because why would it not be there? I mean, assuming you have historic paint, of course. So it's up to you if you want to test or not. But if you're not going to be damaging it or anything, you can also just leave it encapsulated. Similarly, asbestos, it's a little less, it's not quite as easy to know what contains asbestos and what doesn't without testing. But if you're not going to be removing or damaging any materials, you shouldn't need to worry about it too much. It's again, you know, if you're ripping up flooring or cutting holes in walls, that's when you're going to want to get this tested. Otherwise, you can leave it encapsulated and it's not going to bother you. Animal droppings, also a good thing to be aware of. You know, if you're going down in the basement or the crawl space, cleaning out an old shed. Hantavirus is a very real thing here in Colorado. Actually has a lot of very similar symptoms to coronavirus. So make sure if you are cleaning out one of these areas that you spray down any animal droppings with bleach beforehand and let that sit for a while. There's some good guidance on the Colorado Department of Public Health website on how to clean that. And then chemicals, I already mentioned, you know, being aware of that methylene chloride and the paint strippers, but no matter what chemical you're using, just make sure you read the warning labels, read the instructions, and make sure you're protecting yourself appropriately. And speaking of protection, just some basic things that you're probably going to need. Number one being safety goggles. You never know what's going to happen. So like, even if you're just stripping paint, you probably want to be wearing those safety goggles. Respirators, it's really going to depend on what you're doing. You know, there's different respirators required for dealing with lead, for dealing with asbestos, for dealing with chemicals. So just make sure you do your homework beforehand and read and make sure you have the, you know, the right one for the project that you're doing. Of course, good luck getting one right now, but you know, when they become available again, make sure you are getting the right one. And then gloves, of course, that's just sensible again if you're dealing with chemicals, or you know, you just want some durable gloves for cleaning off roofs or removing vegetation, things like that. So you've got all your tools, you've got your supplies, you've got your skills. Now you need to figure out what needs to be done. So I like to start with a detailed to-do list. That's really all this is with your inspection. And this is, you know, obviously if you're purchasing a new home, you're going to have a home inspection done then too. But even if you've owned your home for a while, you can do your own inspection. So you want to systematically inspect each element of your home, write down each issue that you find. Make sure you are considering seasonal changes. So, you know, you want to check it after a rainstorm, or here at my house, I like to check it to see where the snow is building up. So right here, it's almost up to the windowsill. That's important information for me to know. And so then you're going to need to prioritize each issue, not by cost, but by the need. So what is, you know, what are your immediate concerns? Where is water getting into the building? What is going to cause more damage if you don't fix it now? What can you maybe do a temporary fix and then fix more later? So you want to prioritize those, be flexible because obviously things will change, but it's important to know, regardless of money, what needs to be done now. And then once you have your inspection list, you are ready to assess how you're going to get these projects done. Is this something you can do yourself? Do you have the skills? Do you have the equipment? Do you have the supplies, or can you get the supplies? Do you even have the time? Are you going to need to take time off work to get this done? If you don't have all four of those, then you might need to hire a contractor. So, and we'll discuss that here more in a minute. So here's another good example for my house. This is a nice surprise water damage that we got about a month ago from, I have no idea. from the window trim, not the window itself. So now I have to learn how to do drywall because we don't have plaster in our home. But for me, you know, that's something right now with coronavirus, we all have the time and can get the supplies. So I'll figure that one out for myself. But here at the bottom, these are some windows that we actually paid a contractor to repair because they needed new muntins and new rails because they were so badly damaged. And I don't have the equipment to mill, you know, new pieces of lumber that look exactly as the historic pieces do, nor do I want to buy that equipment. So for me, that was worth it to hire a contractor to do that work. So I think it goes without saying that finding a contractor can be a bit of a pain, and I think we all know that. So obviously, first step is to ask around for references, other historic homeowners in your area. You just want to make sure that you're asking people that are experienced with historic buildings, because otherwise you're going to have to teach them. And sometimes you have to do that. But so you want to make sure you know your scope of work, what your budget's going to be ahead of time. Make sure you're not getting anything added to your scope of work, or that, you know, maybe you want to do part of it yourself and you only want the contractor to do this one bit. Just make sure that's clear. You also want to make sure that you know how you want it done. You want to maintain those preservation principles for your house. And so we'll talk about that more in a minute, but this can be incredibly important when dealing with the contractor because you're going to have to educate them a lot about what exactly you want done and how you want it done and what materials you want it done with. That's going to be up to you. And again, don't be afraid to reach out to your Historic Preservation Commission or your local government. You know, they're there to help you. They can provide those recommendations. They might also be able to, you know, help guide your contractor if they're willing. So yeah, just reach out and maintain that relationship as well. And so for me, you know, when I was looking for a contractor to do those window repairs, if you've ever had to find someone to do window repairs, it's not necessarily easy. But I was fortunate enough to know of a building down the street from me that had recently had their windows restored. And so I just called up the contractor that they used. All right, so now we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty, the fun part of how to inspect and maintain the different parts of your house. So of course this is gonna vary depending on your house. I've tried to keep it very general because it's impossible to account for every, you know, material and event that might happen. So the first thing that you're gonna wanna start with is your roof. I like to start from the top down, it's up to you. So when you're inspecting your roof, you're going to want to look for damaged materials. So that's pretty straightforward. Missing tiles, missing sections of your roof, things that are detached from the roof, stuff like that. Deteriorated flashing, because that's, you know, where you have those joints in your roof or where it meets perhaps a chimney. You want to make sure those are in good condition because otherwise you might be getting some water infiltration. Make sure your gutters and downspouts are operating correctly. Again, just trying to keep water away from the building. Organic material growth or interactions. So maybe you have a tree that's overhanging your roof and leaves are falling on the roof and maybe moss is growing on the roof. It's holding a lot of moisture against the roof. Those are things you want to keep an eye out for. And then of course leaks into the attic. Those are obviously not normal, something you're going to want to address immediately. So here I have some pictures of my roof. My roof's in pretty good shape. You can see there's a little rust from an old stovepipe that's running down. And then in the second photo, I do have some leaves I need to clean off my garage. So good to know. So maintenance, this is when you're going to take care of those issues that you've identified, but also just things you want to do routinely to make sure you're keeping your house in good condition. So you're going to want to remove or trim any organic materials. Ideally, you're going to do that seasonally because, you know, you don't want the leaves to fall on the roof in the fall and wait all the way until next summer to take them off for obvious reasons. You want to secure any loose flashing, again, to prevent those leaks. Align gutters and seal any leaks in the gutters. You probably are gathering that there's a theme here, and that is water. Water is is going to be the enemy of your historic home, #1 enemy. Really, if you can just keep water from getting in random places, you're going to be pretty good. You might also need to repoint your chimney. And again, that might be something you need to hire out. So you just want to make sure you're planning ahead for that because it will need to be done periodically. So here on my house has some decorative roof details. So these are just the rafter tails and they extend, further out than the roof line, which means they get a lot of water on them. So in order to maintain them, they have to be painted pretty, probably once a year, once every 2 years. Otherwise, they look like this. And then we get some wood rot and we have a much bigger issue. So, 30 minutes and a can of paint or a huge project trying to replace them. Walls are pretty straightforward. When you're doing your inspection, you want to look for any cracks, spalling, bulging, misaligned surfaces, basically anything weird. You want to keep an eye out for that. Wood rot or insect or rodent infestation. It's a good idea when you're doing your inspection to have like a sharp tool, a sharp metal tool that you can kind of poke things with to look for that wood rot, see if anything's soft. Again, any water intrusion or moisture damage, paint, obviously that's going to be the easiest one to identify. Does it need to be painted again? And then any kind of minor deficiencies, like if you have holes in your walls for cables or whatever, you just want to make sure those are secure and not allowing water in. So here's an example on my house that I found when I was doing my inspection, that there was a crack in the stucco that's been kind of patched, but is cracking again. So similar to roofs, when it comes to maintaining the walls, you want to remove organic materials. Again, make sure those bushes and everything are not up against the building. You want to clean the surfaces, get the cobwebs, dirt, etc. off the building. And that's primarily because those things will just attract more dirt and debris, and you just want to keep that off. Patch or replace any holes, damaged siding, maybe you have a couple of boards that need to be replaced. You can just do that pretty easily. Repoint or paint. So repoint if you have masonry walls, paint. Again, you want to make sure you're planning ahead to repaint, and then caulk and seal. Just make sure you're not caulking and sealing your operable windows, please. But caulk and seal, any holes where things might be getting in. So another example of something I need to do is repaint this siding, which was painted without being prepared properly, so it hasn't lasted as long as it should have. And then everyone's favorite, windows and doors, maybe just preservationist favorite. So when you're doing your inspection, you want to look for loose or poorly fitting components. Are your windows operable? Are your doors operable? Do the locks work? How are the hinges doing? A lot of this you're going to know just from regular operation, but you might not use your windows very often. So it might be something you have to specifically make a note to check. You also want to look for cracked, loose, or missing glazing or putty. Just want to make sure you're keeping those windows weather tight. Any peeling paint, corrosion, rust stains, again, we're just trying to maintain here. And then any organic materials or insect damage on the windows. So here I have two examples. The top one is a restored window. It's not perfect, it's a historic window. It's seen some it's seen some weather. And it needs a little paint touch up, but otherwise it's in good shape. This other one is unrestored and needs a lot of work, but still completely doable. So as far as maintenance goes for windows and doors, again, we're going to want to clean the surfaces, remove debris. An important one for windows and doors is adjusting your weather stripping or perhaps replacing it periodically. That's going to be a great return on your investment. Is adding that weather stripping, replacing glazing and putty if needed. So if you have any broken panes or the putty is just cracked and falling out, you just need to replace that. It's pretty easy. You might need to make some minor repairs, and then of course prime and paint, and then tighten and lubricate any hardware, and maybe you want to polish it on the inside as well. So here's a good example Again, this is that window that I showed where we had the plywood taken out. So this is on the top photo after the consolidant has been added, and that's going to allow the epoxy to adhere a little easier. And then on the bottom is just a partial putty repair for this pane because the putty had fallen out. And I guess this is a good time to point out, there's a lot of folks that will tell you, you must use a certain product, you must repair it a certain way. But the truth is, it really doesn't matter. In the end, it's your house, you're not getting paid to do it. You just need to try your best. Try to, again, maintain those preservation practices as best you can. But, you don't have to be perfect, and that's okay. Also, I should warn you now, if you're going to be glazing windows, especially if you've never done it before, just accept now that you will break a window, possibly 2, maybe 3. Accept it now, it's gonna be okay. And again, that's a great reason why you should learn on someone else's building instead of your own. And I apologize if you hear my dog snoring in the background. Oh well. Okay, so inspecting the foundation, last one. Obviously, you're gonna wanna look for any standing water, pooling, that's a very bad sign. You definitely don't want water up against your foundation. You want to make sure that you don't have any grade slope towards your house, because obviously that's going to funnel water into the foundation. And again, we're looking for that animal or insect infestation. The fun thing about the foundation is, you can get those larger animals in the foundation or the crawl space. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for them. Vegetation, again, make sure it's not growing up right against the building, and any sort of material deterioration, so maybe your masonry is falling or cracked, things like that. So here in my house, I can't see a lot of the foundation from the outside, so sometimes you might need to go into the crawl space to get a good look at it. So here's a picture from my crawl space with some historic electrical wiring. And photo number 2 here is some rodents that are digging under my foundation. So I don't know if you guys have ground squirrel problems there, but that's definitely something to keep an eye out for. So maintenance, I've pretty much said all of these already before. So I think you guys know it by now. You're gonna remove the debris and vegetation, super simple. Reset or adjust any downspouts. Just make sure it's not coming out of the downspout and then splashing back up against the building. You just want to avoid that. You want to clean off any discoloration on the foundation and just keep an eye on that. Consider where is that discoloration coming from, and then repoint or repair as needed. Again, something to plan ahead for. So something on my to-do list here. I have some flowers, growing against the foundation of the shed. And it's actually both a vegetation issue and a drainage issue because they like the water that's running off the roof here because there's no gutter. So it's something I have to work on. So these are just some general overall tips that are in line with preservation practices. Basically, if you can follow these things, you don't need to worry about, the Secretary of the Interior standards or maybe even your local design guidelines, because these are just simple, common sense things that if you're doing these, you're probably gonna be good. First is to clean using the gentlest means possible, which basically means please never sandblast your building, avoid power washing it or using harsh chemicals. Most of, the results that you need can probably be achieved with soap and water and a little bit of elbow grease. If not, and you do have to power wash your building, use the lowest setting. If you do have to use a harsh chemical, test it first, things like that. Just, common sense. Second is to repair rather than replace. And you've probably gotten that already from the maintenance slides, but these materials are built to last. They're meant to be maintained. If you take care of them, they're going to save you money in the long run. And I know that kind of goes against, a lot of what we see in society today with all these maintenance-free materials. But how I like to look at it is if a material is maintenance-free, that just means it's going to be a very expensive replacement down the road. And maybe that's not an expensive replacement for me, but it's going to be an expensive replacement for someone. So it's a lot easier to do those minor maintenance things than to go and have to buy, you know, all new windows or all new siding or something like that. The third one is, if necessary, to replace in kind. So if something is just completely gone or it's just completely beyond repair, then you're going to want to make sure you're replacing it with the same material, same design, in kind. And this might be something that you have to ask for help for, because this can be a little more difficult. And then you're going to also want to use reversible practices. And I know that's kind of a vague term, but basically, you know, you want to have some humility when it comes to your historic home. You know, you're just a short part in a very long history for that building, and you don't want to be the one that screws it up. So, you know, maybe you can't do what's best for the building now, you don't have the money, or you're just not sure. You know, leave the option open for someone to fix it later, to do a better job, to take off whatever you did and put back something better. So just, you know, keep that in mind whenever you're making a decision about what you want to do, what material you want to use, what supplies you're going to use. Just don't be the person, you know, that nailed and caulked the window shut, because I guarantee you the next homeowner is going to curse your name. So here's a photo of me removing some paint from hardware. This is what we like to call the crockpot method. I like to use, well, you just put the painted hardware in the crockpot with a little bit of soap and leave it for as long as it needs to, and the paint will peel right off. I also like to use little dental tools to get paint out of the details. And there's actually a great article on this on the History Colorado website right now from the Rocky Mountain Center for Preservation. So I highly recommend checking that out. And I should point out that, yes, I do have a dedicated crockpot just for the hardware. I'm not cooking food and hardware in the same crockpot. So definitely don't do that. Okay, so getting organized for your maintenance plan. Again, start with an annual seasonal checklist for inspections, and we'll look at an example of that. You want to take photos each time you inspect for reference, so you can go back and identify those changes over time. You also want to schedule routine maintenance like painting, roof replacement, again, just planning ahead. Keep all records. Future you or the future homeowner is really going to thank you for having records of, you know, last time you painted this, last time you did the roof. I personally like to use a spreadsheet, but you know, it can be as simple or as uncomplicated as you like. And so, you know, at our house, we like to check the roof in December when the Christmas lights are being put up. So that's what's happening in this photo here. But again, it's going to depend what works best for you. So here's a nice sample inspection checklist. So the top table is one for my house. You know, it's pretty simple. I have a small house. A couple things to point out, you know, like I said, we check the roof in the winter simply because of the Christmas lights, but otherwise most things are checked in spring or spring and fall because that's, you know, once they've survived the long winter, it's good to take a look and see how things are doing. And also should point out, you know, if it says, okay, we're gonna inspect this in the spring, spring could mean, you know, twice in the spring. We're gonna check it during dry conditions and then maybe after or during a rainstorm, something like that. And then here at the bottom, this is a more detailed inspection checklist, and I'll be providing you a resource for this if you'd like to see a example checklist and create your own from that. This is from the National Park Service's preservation brief. And so as you can see, you can get really more detailed, you know, roof drainage, building perimeter, the attic, the crawl space, things like that. And then here is a sample maintenance log. So again, you know, you can do more than this, you can do less. For features, you know, you might want to add not just a roof, but the chimney, the rafter tails, the flashing, things like that. Material, you probably know what materials are on your house, but if you have maybe something more complex, or you want to, you know, specify a specific product, like what roofing product did you use last time you re-roofed, you can put that on here. Condition, again, I have it really general, but you could be more detailed and explain exactly, you know, what's going on with the, hold on a second. Dogs. And then, so you're going to want to explain what maintenance is required, and that's going to be your to-do list. So for me, you know, I know I need to go remove those leaves from the garage roof, and I know that I need to go and scrape and paint the west wall of the garage. And so when I've done those things, I go and put the date in my little log, so then I know. So if I go back and I realize, you know, that I'm painting that west wall of the garage every 2 years, you know, something's not right there. Maybe I need to consider a different paint, or maybe something else is going on. So this is going to be a great resource for you and for future homeowners to know when and how these things happened. Okay, so I promise I'm wrapping up now. Just a few resources for you. The National Park Service has 50 preservation briefs that cover basically just about everything, every kind of material or feature that you might find on a historic building. And they have, you know, the good preservation practices that you want to follow. So I highly recommend those. And if you would like to see some sample inspection checklists, maintenance plans, check out preservation brief number 47, which is maintaining the exterior of small and medium-sized historic buildings. I mentioned Bob Yap a little earlier when talking about training. This is his website, bobyap.com. He also has like a great blog and some great videos that I recommend you check out. And he might, some of our communities here in Colorado have actually invited him to come speak and do workshops here. So you never know when he might be here in Colorado as well. Rocky Mountain Center for Preservation, again, they have a Facebook group. That's the best way, I think, to find them and keep in touch. And HistoricCorps can be found at historiccorps.org. And again, I encourage you to sign up for a project and build your skills. And so you'll notice I have put very few resources on this page. And that's because, again, I think all the information's out there. You just need to Google it. Just keep those tips in mind that we talked about, you know, the preservation practices, repairing rather than replace, so on and so forth. You know, just read it with a critical eye, and I bet the information's out there for you. And with that, I will be happy to take your questions. And again, the recording of this webinar is going to be available on YouTube. It usually takes about a week, but it will be there if you wanted to share this with anyone else. So please use the Q&A function and ask us a question. All right, so we have a question. Are state historical fund grants available for private homes or other grants? So if you're joining us from out of state, State Historical Fund is a state grant program that we have here. Technically, I believe they could, State Historical Fund grants could be available for private homes, but I do not believe they would be competitive at all. Or for private buildings, privately owned buildings, I should say. So no, essentially, I would not recommend that. But there might be other grants available. Again, you need to contact your local municipality. They're gonna know best what is available for you. I'm not aware of any statewide grant programs for private homes. Okay, we have another question. My mother's house was built in 1965. Do you think lead-based paint is a concern? Yes, lead-based paint is frequently a concern. Even though it's later, I would definitely get it tested before you do any work. You know, you can buy the test kits at the hardware store. It's pretty inexpensive. Or you can have, you know, a company come in and do it. It just depends on how much work you're planning. But it's definitely better to err on the side of caution, especially, you know, if you have small children or pets or anything like that. Okay. Next question. Is there a rule or guidance for when one or more sides of a house can't be seen from the street, so you don't have to re-side it with like materials? So this is a bit of a complicated question. If it's a locally designated property, then you're gonna have to follow whatever design guidelines have been established by your local government. From a purely, you know, preservation standpoint, we would say, you know, well, we wouldn't want you to re-side it at all, or that we would want it re-sided with like materials. But yeah, it's going to depend on your municipality. So you would need to check with them and check with your design guidelines. But from a preservation standpoint, you know, we want to preserve all sides of the house, not just the ones that are visible from the street. Okay, next question. Our 1875 house has some plastered walls that need repaired. Can drywall be used instead, or should they be replastered? So I'm sure you're expecting me to say that they should be replastered, but good luck finding a plasterer these days. I have, depending on the size of the repair, I have seen drywall mud used successfully on plaster to do some relatively minor repairs. It's just going to depend on how skilled the drywall person is. If you're thinking, you know, of just taking down the entire wall and putting up drywall, you know, plenty of folks do that, and I completely understand. And again, it's your house, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, you have some options. I would try the drywall mud if you can, and if that's something you can do yourself. And of course, if you can't, find a plasterer, but that's probably going to be tough, especially for 1875 plaster. All right, well, thank you all again for joining us today. If you have any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer them. Again, the recording will be available on YouTube in about a week. Yeah, thank you all for joining us. I hope you can come back next week. We're going to be talking about the British preservation system over in the UK. So that should be really interesting. Wednesday at noon. We'll see you then.